我哋應該夠可能，我哋就先請官員入席先。早晨。早晨各位，就因為時間到啦，亦都我哋嘅足夠參加會議嘅人數，亦都首先歡迎今日嚟出席嘅各位官員，有財經事務及庫務局首席助理秘書長廖生，有金管局嘅銀行政策嘅簡嘉蘭女士，有金管局嘅銀行政策嘅朱生，仲有就係律政司政府律師吳生，律政司高級助理法律草擬專員林生，同埋金管局嘅高級經理銀行政策邱女士。好啊，我哋先歡迎各位，就今日就繼續係作為第二次嘅小組委員會嘅會議。咁咧就喺上一次會議之後，我哋係咪需要對上一次會議提出嘅啲事項咧跟進一下？就係上一次會議咧就委員同意咗邀請呢個銀行業諮詢委員會以及接受存款公司諮詢委員會，以及香港有限制牌照銀行及接受存款公司公會以及銀行公會以上嘅咁多個機構咧，就提供呢個書面意見嘅，對於3項嘅附屬法例嘅回應意見。咁啊，有關機構咧嘅回覆就已經跟隨立法會俾我哋一個文件，係 CB 1/1752-1301至03嘅文件咧，發俾我哋各位委員噶啦。我相信大家已經備悉咗有關文件嘅。咁有關文件咧就收之外咧，我亦都喺度表達一下咧，就係因為銀行界方面嘅一啲意見咧，就提供咗俾本人，就佢哋有留意到呢個有所謂叫發達國家對呢個2013年1月1號實施巴塞爾呢個協議3嘅呢個有關嘅實施有延嘅一啲報導，咁咧就所以有機構咧就反映就係話英國嘅金融服務局 FSA 喺12年8月1號咧就發表個聲明，表示英國冇可能喺2013年1月1號推行巴塞爾3之後咧，美國嘅聯儲局同埋聯邦存款保險公司以及貨幣管理局咧喺11月9號，即係今年11月9號咧，亦都發表個聯合公告，表示收到業界大量唔同意見，所以咧不期待喺13年1月1號實施呢個新協定。咁呢個咧就係因為本港嘅業界咧亦都關注到呢啲問題，所以咧就透過我亦都反映一下，話如果我哋要實施嘅話，亦都唔應該係成為第一批或者早於呢啲地區或者國家實施嘅作為一個帶頭者呢個提法。咁所以我喺度咧代表業界咧先反映咗呢個意見先。唔知政府方面有冇咩特別嘅回應咧？廖生，使唔使？
我請金管局嘅。
一陣間你先再講。OK。
我唔係，我請金管局啊。
金管局嗰方面再講。邊位？ 簡女士。
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I would note that the Basel Committee itself has not changed its implementation date. For the first phase of Basel III, that remains the 1st of January 2012. Other Asian regulators are poised to go ahead on the 1st of January 2013. Sorry, I said 2012, I meant 2013. So, for instance, Singapore has issued its rules, Australia has issued its rules, the mainland has issued its rules. So, jurisdictions are moving towards the 1st of January 2013 date. We are aware that the US announced on the 9th of November that there would be some delay in the US. However, in their announcement, the US took care to refer to the fact that they take their international timing commitments very seriously and are working expeditiously to complete their rulemaking powers. The US has already undergone a level 2 assessment by the Basel Committee, so its notice of proposed rulemaking and its proposed rules have been reviewed for compliance, and the report that was published indicated a high degree of compliance with Basel III. So the US are moving steadily towards the implementation of Basel III. In terms of the capital held by the banks, even though Basel III is not actually in place in the US, the large banks that are included in the Federal Reserve's stress testing program must show an ability to hold Tier 1 common risk-based capital, akin to CET1 under Basel III, of 5%. So even though Basel III is not in force as such, the banks in the US are moving towards the position where they will be in line with Basel III. And also on the 9th of November, the US announced the 2013 stress testing program, so that this process is going to continue going forward. For the EU, again, we are aware that there is some delay. There is a political process to be undertaken within the EU, and there is a trialogue discussion going on between the Parliament, the Commission, and the EU Council. On the 13th of November, it seems that there was a meeting of the Council for Economic and Financial Affairs where they discussed CRD4, which is the EU version of Basel III. And there was a press release that referred to a commitment to reach an agreement with the Parliament before the end of the year. So I think they still intend to reach political agreement on CRD4 within this year, and then it will be a question of implementation next year. It's obviously not possible on the 31st of December to make an agreement and have the banks implement immediately from the 1st of January. So there will be a lead-in time. But so far as we are aware, both the EU and the US are moving towards Basel III implementation, Chairman.
Okay.
If like the Chairman said, sorry, I'm having a bad throat. If in the States and in like UK, they're not going to implement it on the first part of 2013. Then if we implement it, then most of our banks have relationship or actually are part of the banks in New York and London. Then how would that particular multinational bank operate? If they don't have the Hong Kong, I assume that will be a subsidiary of, let's say, a large bank. Just, I guess we're not supposed to use names, but then the bank that's headquartered in London or New York, if they're not implementing it yet, and we're doing it, how does that particular bank's internal management comply to that? Or are we saying that it doesn't really matter? We could do it first because we're doing a better job. So we do it first, and they could follow suit later. I guess one answer must be that if an international bank have like 40 branches around the world, one of the countries have to do it first. So someone will have to start doing it. And if they all do it and the UK or London, New York does it later, they won't have trouble implementing it. But I guess the Chairman's question is maybe a lot of Hong Kong people would ask, why do we want to be ahead of New York or London? After all, they're still the leading financial market in the world. I'm just talking New York, London. And it seems the Chairman said that both London and New York will not be implementing it full steam ahead on January 31st? Could we at least go at the same pace as London, New York, and not be ahead of them? And if we do it ahead of them, are there an advantage to us? Maybe reputation-wise, you could say we're leading New York, London. But other than that, in real terms, are there any benefits?
Thank you, Chairman. Again, I would reiterate that the delay in the US and the EU is due to the circumstances prevailing there. The international regulatory reform effort, spearheaded by the FSB and the Basel Committee, set the 1st of January 2013 as the timetable. So as members of the Basel Committee, the FSB, and working towards strengthening the financial system, the global financial system, following the crisis, we are committed to the 1st of January 2013. We actually think that Basel III is useful, that the crisis showed that banks did not have enough capital. So therefore, strengthening the resilience of banks, but with an extended time frame for implementation to enable them to support sustainable economic development, seems to us to be the most balanced way of proceeding. And so for that reason, we propose, as far as we are aware, other Asian regulators that are perhaps better placed to meet the standards to proceed.
So Chairman, it seems the answer is that in EU, they are not ready to implement. The main reason is the capital ratio. And if the point is that our banks is in such good condition or better condition under our internal rules of HKMA, we're all in a position to do that. As the letter from Hong Kong Association of Banks said, that since we're meeting the criteria anyway, then we could do it without much trouble. While if they can do it because of their capital ratio, then it's up to them. If we're not ready, then we'll have a problem. Since we're ready, then we're saying that why don't we do it first? So is that the main difference between EU and the States, the fact they cannot comply on January 2013 is because of singly one item, is the capital ratio?
I think that's certainly a large contributing factor. I think there are some other factors at play. So, for instance, for the US, they put out their consultation first in June, so it was relatively late. The reason being that they have to deal with the Dodd-Frank Act. Now, the Basel regulatory capital framework uses external ratings for some of the approaches. The Dodd-Frank Act actually prohibits the US regulators from using external ratings, again, largely because of what happened in the crisis, where the ratings for very certain products were not found to perform as expected. So in the US, if you like, they have to form their own version of Basel III in compliance with the Dodd-Frank Act. So the complexity of that, plus the fact that resource-wise they're producing hundreds and hundreds of sets of rules under Dodd-Frank, has inevitably slowed them down. So they began, I think, consulting in June. They extended the consultation period until towards the end of October. So they've just got the comments back. So they have a sort of a volume of work and a deal of complexity to deal with. Again, in the EU, there was some concerns over the summer about the way the EU have decided to do a single rule book. So Basel standards are usually, are a minimum standard. In the EU, they decided to try to make sure that individual members did not go above that minimum in order to sort of conform the single rule across the EU. Some jurisdictions were very vociferous in their objection to that, including the UK, Sweden. So they had to come to a compromise solution on that over the summer. I understand also that for some reason within their capital requirement, they have bonus restrictions, which have nothing to do with the capital, but have gone into there, so there's a political element to that. So I think all of these combined factors, plus, frankly, the fact that they're working on banking union as well, at the same time, have sort of slowed down the process in the EU. So again, they have competing demands upon them that are coming into it. So capital is one thing, but there are, I think, some surrounding factors that are also militating towards delay.
Chairman, if members are not have any specific question to ask yet, may I continue with two short ones? Okay. Two short ones. The first one is we have two submissions. It's the DTC Association and the Hong Kong Association of Banks. We have two copies. Are we saying that when we want to get the industry's view, these are the two main sort of associations that's related to this whole Basel III arrangements, and there's no further association that might have a view that we had not written for them for view or they had not responded? These are the two major twos?
Yes,
okay.
These are the two major twos.
And then on the HK Association of Banks, it seems their reply is a bit longer. They're saying, for example, in paragraph 2, in general, we're supportive of the principle of that topic. It seems they use the word supportive, they use the word principle. They say we reinforce Hong Kong position. Then at the bottom of that page, they're saying between different banks according to the individual circumstances such as size, financial position, business and group nature. It seems they do think that even if we do it in Hong Kong now, you have to base on these, blah, blah, blah. Then some will have an easier time complying with it. Some might have a difficult time complying it. So would our position be that once this is set up, we do give them a sort of a grace period, I don't know, 6 months, 9 months, so that the big banks that meet all these will have an easier time to do it, and the other ones will have a chance to do it? Or will you say that if they don't meet it by a certain deadline, in certain clauses, they will be penalized?
We've been talking to the banks for a long time on Basel III, and they have already capital planning arrangements. So they have been working towards compliance with these the content of this set of rules with effect from the 1st of January 2013. I think that the point that HCAB are making is that there may be variation across banks. If you have a big derivative operation, then you will be affected by some of the new charges relating to derivatives. If your capital base has less common equity, then you may be looking to raise more common equity. Although with Hong Kong banks, they tend to hold a lot of common equity, so the new common equity Tier 1 ratio should not be a problem for them.
Thank you, Chairman. Perhaps I would also follow up on the letter from the Hong Kong Association of Banks. It seems that they are making two very interesting points that I do not understand how they would work out in practice. The first point that they made is the one under para 2, where they made the point that they believe it is imperative that a level regulatory playing field is created and that the Basel III proposals are implemented globally. Over the page, they are saying, top of the page, that second line, we also note that as part of the consultation process, the Hong Kong MA have undertaken to monitor Basel III implementation developments in other major jurisdictions, for example, the EU and US, to ensure there is no competitive disadvantage to authorized institutions in Hong Kong. Now, perhaps the chairman can also enlighten me on this. What if, as a result of the monitoring process, some banks or the Hong Kong Association of Banks as a whole comes to the view that by implementing Basel III in Hong Kong on 1st of January 2013 would place Hong Kong banks in a disadvantage when competing with EU banks and US banks. And they are not satisfied that a level regulatory playing field is being created. Can they be exempted from compliance with the rules that we are making today? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. No, they won't be exempted from compliance. But so you are correct, sir. No, what we've said to the Hong Kong Association of Banks as the consultation process has unfolded is that we will monitor the way in which implementation takes place in other jurisdictions. So as we discussed last time, you have the Basel text, but each jurisdiction has to transpose that into its own legal framework. And so sometimes in that transposition, changes may be made. We've made a few ourselves that we've outlined. Other jurisdictions may do the same, and we would be interested to see if any of those changes materially change the effect of Basel III on their banks. So it's an ongoing process. So we have been looking at the work that the Basel Committee itself has been doing on the US and the EU in terms of their assessment of compliance on the draft rules, and there will be a follow-up to that when the final rules are issued. So it's an ongoing process. It's not necessarily the case that if the EU changes something, then we would automatically follow suit. We will consider what is suitable in Hong Kong, whether it's a major disadvantage, whether from a prudential concern we think we should still stick to the Basel III principle, or whether we should introduce some flexibility.
If I may follow up. I think this is the point that the Honourable James Tean has been following. It seems that the Hong Kong Association of Banks is a bit worried that by compliance with the rules that we are making today would somehow put our banks in a disadvantaged position when competing with other banks, for example, in the US and in the EU, globally. That's why they are making the point under Para 2 that there had to be a level regulatory playing field. If compliance means Hong Kong banks are being penalized, then of course we as legislators are concerned that we should not put our banks in a disadvantaged position. My question, and I think similar question from the Honourable James Tean, whether that would turn out to be the case. That is our worry.
I think we should remember to some extent why we're doing what we're doing. The crisis showed that the existing system, the Basel II system, allowed banks to operate with less capital than it turned out that they needed. Times had moved on. Banking had changed, and banks were running perhaps more risk than the existing capital system was designed to support. So as a result of the crisis, it is generally agreed that banks need to hold more and better quality capital. But whilst in a crisis situation you could make the crisis worse if you implement everything immediately and say, in a perfect world, this is what I want, now do this. So the Basel III process is designed to be a balance. It's designed to raise the level and quality of banks' capital, which we think is a good thing. It's designed to do this over an extended implementation period so that that does not, the raising of the new capital, the new standards do not impede upon banks' normal credit intermediation activities. So we think Basel III is a good thing. So it's not something that we're just following because everybody else is following. We think it's good. And so we think our banks should be moving towards this. And I think they think the same in the EU and in the US. It is just that they are unfortunately delayed by other issues that are affecting their jurisdictions, which were indeed the jurisdictions worst affected by the crisis.
Chairman, with your permission, I think we are talking at cross purposes here. Of course, I understand fully what Ms. Camp is trying to tell us, that this is for the good of everybody, that the Basel III more stringent requirements of capital standards, etc., should be applied to the banks in Hong Kong. But, Chairman, I must first confess that I am no expert in banking operation. The Chairman certainly is. But it seems that from the letter that we are looking at, dated the 15th of November, from the Hong Kong Association of Banks, they are worried, as experts in the banking operation, that a level regulatory playing field may not be created on the 1st of January 2013. And from the point that I read to you, Ms. Camp, over the page on page 2 of their letter, it seems that they are envisaging a situation that investors may decide to go somewhere else than Hong Kong because in those places, their banks have not been required to live up to the Basel III more stringent standards. So as an investor deciding on which market or banks in which market to go to for investment purposes, for what they want to achieve, they may take advantage of this window of difference between the regulatory framework in Hong Kong, which is Basel III compliant, and some other markets where banks are not yet required to live up to the Basel III standard. I think the point that worries us, and apparently the Hong Kong Association of Banks, was that point. And Chairman, I don't think that point has been addressed.
Okay.
I think from an investor point of view, the stronger the bank, the better. So I think that I think it would almost go the other way, that if you haven't implemented the Basel standards and your banks are perceived to be weaker, they might find it more difficult in attracting investors. So from the point of view of banks' funding, there may be advantages in adopting the more stringent standards.
Well, Chairman, I don't pretend to be expert here. If the Hong Kong Association of Banks is only prepared to go as far as what we are reading in the letter 15th of November 2002, then I would rest my case here.
Okay. Okay. Xin Yun.
Mr. Chairman, I'm reading news. Here it says Basel III could be finalized. Basel III could be finalized in December. Says Cypriot finance ministers. What the news I've learned is the European minister, finance minister, is still discussing some sort of rules. So I think I just want to echo some of the points raised by some of our colleagues. It seems that even the U.S. Treasury is saying, they are not implementing Basel III on 1st of January 2015. So do many of the European countries. So could you tell me, to be more exact, what countries will be ready, will be implementing on 1st of January, and see if we need to follow suit. I think the banks are subtly saying, we would like to comply, but no need to hurry. That's the message that I read through lines of the letter.
Thank you. Okay, Australia has issued its final rules to take effect on the 1st of January. Mainland China has issued its final rules to take effect on the 1st of January. India has issued its final rules to take effect on the 1st of January. Japan has issued its final rules to take effect on the 1st of January. Singapore has issued final rules to take effect on the 1st of January. Switzerland has issued final rules to take effect on the 1st of January. Canada directed its banks in February 2011 to meet the new CET1 standard as of the 1st of January. So those ones we know are definites. Korea, we know, issued a draft regulation in September 2012. And I think Indonesia is still consulting. They issued a draft in June 2012.
May I focus on several countries like UK, the US? Have they more exact timetable? How about Germany? These three big countries, for example.
Okay, the UK and Germany are obviously bound by the EU timetable in the sense that they will implement in their jurisdictions CRD4, the European Directive, Capital Requirement Directive. So it's difficult for them to implement before CRD4 is finalised.
So they're bundling with the European Union.
Yes.
Okay.
So, but having said that, both of those, a couple of weeks ago we saw the Germans issued some preparatory legislation, so they're waiting for CRD4 to come into effect. And I think the UK also issued some transitional provisions for consultation, so they are preparing for CRD4. But for both of those jurisdictions, it will be CRD4 that comes that they need to come into effect first. As I said earlier, for the USA, they have announced the delay, but they were very careful to note that they are very cognizant of their international timing commitments and that they are working expeditiously to finalise the rulemaking process. But no firm timetable.
我諗嚟基本上都歸納前邊我哋討論嘅就係都係關注特別好多銀行都提過出嚟。亦都透過書面咧，都大家都有啲感覺，就係有擔心，有唔一致實施嘅時候咧，對香港有冇啲不利？咁所以咧，就我建議係咪金管局或者政府方面提供一個我哋收集到嘅而家實施，即係已經決定咗實施時間表嘅有關國家同地區，俾我哋作為其中一個參考嘅書面資料，喺稍後提供俾我哋。咁樣咧就亦都因為討論咗咁多啦，咁大家都相信將呢個關注咧已經交咗俾政府同埋監管當局咧留意因為銀行界始終都係喺競爭當中咧，就擔心同國際上如果唔一致嘅時候，有冇咩可以引起咗香港不利嘅咧？咁呢一點咧，我諗我哋已經記錄清楚喺度。咁如果我哋為咗唔阻礙到嗰個條例嘅審議咧，我哋可以繼續進行。但係咧，嗰個生效同埋點樣即係所謂執行嗰方面咧，都請政府同埋監管當局咧，再進一步再考慮一下，有冇需要有啲乜嘢嘅做法，抑或係繼續處理嘅時候咧，到時喺所謂實施嘅時間表上邊有冇咩其他嘅斟酌？咁呢個就交由翻監管當局同埋政府再作你哋嘅研究，好冇？咁我哋係田
主席，我好同意你嘅做法嘅，我哋可以審呢啲條例啦。不過可唔可能我哋考慮我哋用我哋嘅秘書處就俾封信俾銀行公會呢度啊，就問佢入邊嗰幾段之後，我哋提出嚟，即係佢啲意思好似有啲咁嘅含義，但係又好似唔係講得好清楚，或者佢哋可唔可以整封即係覆下我哋啊？問佢呢度，或者你覺得係透過佢哋去問啊？覆咗俾我哋會得仲清楚啲咧？因為好同意梁家傑議員正話講清啱講嗰兩段啊，即係用咗個字眼 imperative 係好緊要，有個 level regulatory playing field， 跟住有個嘢叫做 implemented globally 喎。但係 globally 佢冇話 at the same time 係咪即係 globally 你可以做遲幾年定係乜意思咧？咁可唔可以佢哋嗰封信啊，同我哋即係銀行公會同我哋覆？咁我唔知秘書處搞唔搞得掂去問佢哋，因為太過專家嘢要透過佢哋幫手問啊。
秘書處你以為點？
我哋可以發信請銀行公會嗰度咧，就作一啲澄清啦，關乎佢信裏邊提供嗰啲啦，特別係頭先有議員講關於嗰個 level playing field 啦個問題，或者提下關於 EU 同埋 US 現金嗰個實施嗰個狀況啦，可以讀啲澄清嘅請銀行公會。
好，咁我哋再補充一下呢方面。咁我相信政府都已經同埋監管當局都應該清楚咗我哋議員嘅關注㗎啦。咁係咪我哋都唔會妨礙而家嘅審議，再可以繼續進行？咁稍後嗰啲咧就再喺再稍後之後再補充，好冇？而家係請政府方面睇下對於繼續審議方面，你哋有咩建議？今日有關嘅文件係請你哋介紹係邊方面嘅審議係開始繼續進行。廖生，
多謝主席。喺上次11月5號舉行嘅會議嗰度咧，咁委員咧要求政府咧再發一份文件俾委員會咧，就係解釋兩項事情嘅。咁第一項事情咧就係喺法例第155章附屬法例 N 銀行業指明多邊發展銀行公告裏面第2條所指明嘅機構係咪有恰當嘅中文譯名啦？咁呢個上次有委員提到嘅。 亦都有委員提到就係話請政府同埋金管局咧係預備一個文件係解釋一下我哋現時嗰個2012年銀行業資本修訂規則同埋巴塞爾協定3發出嗰個嘅資本標準嚟講呢，有啲乜嘢嘢主要修訂或者係商議之處，咁亦都請我哋解釋個點解我哋有咁嘅修訂呢，同埋要解釋一下銀行業就呢啲修訂嘅意見係咁樣。咁就有關問題嘅兩部分，我哋就喺文件裏面已經説明啦。咁我先簡介第一部分就係有關銀行業指明多邊發展銀行公告嗰個草擬嗰度。咁上次有委員呢就提出呢，就係話喺審議嗰份公告裏面呢，同時都發現呢原本嗰個現行嗰個嘅銀行業指明多邊發展銀行嘅公告呢，有一啲嘅多邊發展銀行嘅譯名呢，我哋係冇喺中文嘅文本度呢，係冇寫到嗰個中文名喺度嘅。咁我呢度要解釋多次呢，就係我哋今次嗰個修訂呢，個主要目的就係落實巴塞爾委員會嗰個協定啦，就係將世銀集團其中之一個 Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency 中文名就係多邊投資擔保機構呢，納入喺呢個公告底下嘅。咁上次好多謝委員有提出到，就係現行嗰個中文法例裏面呢，有一啲已經喺法例裏面嘅多邊發展銀行嘅英文呢，係冇直接呢係翻譯做中文嘅。咁我呢度呢都係諮詢過律政司同事嘅意見啦嚇。現行嘅安排呢，就冇特別影響到呢該條附屬法例有關嘅個法律效力同埋運作。咁而亦都鑑於委員嘅意見呢，我哋亦都檢討緊有關嘅條文，因為喺呢條條文即係呢個公告呢，係幾年前草擬嘅時候呢，我哋就冇發現到有關嘅機構嗰個中文嘅名稱。咁我哋而家呢，就需要呢，特別係向呢啲多邊發展銀行再查明一下，佢哋有冇恰當嘅官方中文名稱。咁委員都知道啦，每1、2年呢，政府亦都會有一條呢係成文化雜項修訂嘅條例草案，就係處理呢一系列呢一啲喺文本上嗰啲差異啊，或者係啲譯名啊嗰啲嘅問題嘅。咁我哋喺處理咗個檢討同埋個查詢之後呢，咁政府係承諾呢會係第日喺適當嘅機會透過成文化雜項修訂條例草案呢係處理有關嘅修訂咁樣。咁而今次我哋就覺得唔需要係影響咗而家嗰個立法嘅進度。多謝主席。
關於第二個有關嘅文本比較方面，係咪需要做一啲説明呢？係
主席上次喺會議嘅時候呢，委員呢就亦都鑑於嗰個嘅個規則呢，嗰個份量都好沉重啦，咁就請政府呢就預備一份文件，就係解釋一下究竟巴塞爾協定3裏面規則同我哋而家立緊嗰個法例嗰個規則呢，有乜嘢主要嘅唔同，以方便呢委員係審議有關嘅即係規則嘅。咁我哋政府好樂意提供呢啲嘅資料。咁喺派俾委員嘅文件裏面呢，亦都有個附件，就係用表列嘅形式呢，係解釋咗有關呢啲嘅規則同巴塞爾協定有啲乜嘢嘢嘅分別。咁呢個就方便到議員即係逐cross by cross 嗰個嘅審議嘅。咁我請金管局嘅同事就帶議員去審議有關嘅條文。多謝主席。
好。簡女士。
Thank you, Chairman. The main difference between the banking capital rules and Basel III is that Basel III will allow unrealised gains on property revaluation to be included within common equity Tier 1 capital without limit. The banking capital rules, in contrast, allow recognition only in Tier 2 capital with a 55% haircut. So only 45% of property revaluation gains can be recognised, and only in the lower tier of capital. This reflects the existing situation under our existing capital rules in Hong Kong, and we've chosen to follow this route rather than adopt the Basel III standard due largely to concerns about the historical volatility of prices of commercial property in Hong Kong. So our concern is that by allowing property revaluation gains into common equity Tier 1, we will introduce significant volatility into the common equity Tier 1 ratio, which could have an adverse impact on banks' ability to support or continue lending activities if in future there were to be any rapid or significant fall in property prices. The other deviations from Basel III are more minor. The next item concerns deferred tax assets and mortgage servicing rights. These can be recognised within a threshold within the Basel III approach, but we do not propose to recognise them as capital under the banking capital rules. Our reasons being that we have reservations about the genuine loss absorption capacity of these items. So deferred tax assets for timing differences can only be reversed over time. So at best they represent future potential for reducing profits tax and increasing earnings. We don't think that that is capital. And mortgage servicing rights are created by capitalising future income streams from the servicing of mortgage loans which have been sold. This is important in the United States, but they are not common in Hong Kong. And so we have no experience locally on which to found a judgment as to whether there would be continued availability of income from mortgage servicing rights to a bank in times of stress. The third item in the table, Chairman, is what I would characterise as an anti-avoidance provision. Generally, capital instruments are deducted from capital under Basel III, but a capital investment, particularly if it were to be in a connected company, might be characterised as a loan. It could be a perpetual loan. So we included a provision into the banking capital rules allowing the HKMA to recharacterise something like that as a capital investment if the lending institution cannot demonstrate that it's actually been incurred in the ordinary course of business. Again, this largely reflects the existing position under the capital rules in Hong Kong.
Chairman, Karen, I hope you don't mind. You already went through three items. Could we stop here so we could have a discussion on that? Chairman, first I'd like to declare my interest as I am in the property business and I do borrow banks on some of the projects I do. Karen, on the first point you mentioned, you're saying that under the new rule, the 55% of unrealized gain. Of course, firstly, I'm asking from the view of the borrower of the bank, a developer that borrows money from the bank. So are you saying that on my books, which is audited, if the property is worth so much, you're not saying 55% of that value. You're saying that if it's an unrealized gain, for example, if the property was bought for $1 million and now it's worth $1.5 million, you're saying that 1.5 minus 1, that $500,000 gain, you're only taking 55% of that as an unrealized gain. And that would be allowable under the Basel III for the bank to take the value of my property and lend me according to that value.
No, sorry, no. Maybe I've confused.
So what is this 55%?
So I may have confused the issue a bit. What we're looking at is property that's owned by the bank. So the bank is using it, it's either using it for its branches.
Not the borrowers, but the bank's own property.
The bank's own property. So if that's being revalued and the value is going up significantly, but they're unrealised gains in the sense that the bank hasn't sold the property, so it hasn't got the money, it's just got a paper gain, then we are very nervous about allowing all of that paper gain into what will be the most important indicator of the bank's strength, common equity Tier 1 capital. So we prefer to go with the status quo on this, which we're already doing, which is to say we will recognise 45% of that gain, so 55% is not counted, and we will recognise it in the lower tier of capital, Tier 2 capital. So the different tiers of capital have slightly different characteristics. So the Tier 1 capital is regarded as going concern capital. It should be able to absorb losses and allow the bank to continue in business. Tier 2 capital is perhaps more gone concern capital, so it should absorb losses upon insolvency. But that's not much use for the bank to be able to continue in business. So generally speaking, what we propose to stick with the status quo and not allow unrealised property gains into common equity Tier 1.
Chairman, thank you for that clarification. So it's nothing to do with borrowers. But even in that scenario, I'm sorry, because maybe in Hong Kong it's too small, I have to use names. But let's say use HSBC. Their main building in Central might be built 30 years ago at this price. And now the revaluation might be 3 times of what's it worth. So you're saying the unrealized gain is that's on their book. So for a new bank who just bought a building last year, the unrealized gain could be very small. And that 55% might not mean much. But if you take a bank like, for example, HSBC, the building here, I'm sure the current market value might be 3-4 times of what they were originally booked at and the book cost. So that would be a big haircut. Is that what we're saying that we would do?
Yes, essentially what we're saying is that as long as the gain remains unrealised, so I believe it may have happened with property in the UK. If you sell and you obtain the funds, the money, then it becomes a realised gain. But as long as it remains unrealised, it doesn't get counted as common equity Tier 1 capital for the purposes of the capital rules.
And that will certainly in turn affect the borrowing power of that bank, because if that's not counted into capital, then the money they can lend up to SMEs or whatever in Hong Kong to personal mortgages, that would in proportion also be reduced because of the safe position of this unrealized gain, regardless of the cost. I could see the unrealized gain is 1 or 2 years, well, it's not that much. But if the bank had an old building, that would make a difference. And may I, on the same point, ask if the bank transferred the property to another subsidiary, also wholly owned, then it could be deemed as unrealized gain. We don't have capital gain tax, so the bank can do that. And then that all becomes a realized gain. Then are you saying that 55% will not apply?
We have an anti-avoidance provision.
Would that be considered as anti-avoidance? Because you say unrealized gain, so I'm realizing it. But
it's realized within the same consolidation group.
Okay, that's considered avoidance, which is the third part you just talked about.
Yeah.
Okay, but please comment. Are you saying that that could not be, they could not do that?
Well, we have an anti-avoidance provision that would stop that, because that would just be realising the gain within the group, but there's no new money that's actually come into the group to support the group's lending.
Okay.
So going forward, you will see there's.
因為佢呢個講緊重估嘅問題，所以呢個咧就而家個準則，即係將個百分率咧都定得比較保守啲喺香港，因為個 fluctuation 比較大。所以咧純屬喺個每一次嘅重估嗰度嚟到做一個即係一個條界線咁解。所以我諗呢個咧就反為就唔同呢個 mortgage 嗰啲所謂 collateral 一齊撈埋嚟計算，嗰個就唔即係兩件唔同嘅事。
主席，佢用嘅英文字唔係重估 ，unrealized gain 係重估賺。
佢係當係啊，佢將呢個差異咧就當係得到嘅機啊，但係實際上我哋係唔係即係呢個係完全重估嘅價值嚟嘅，價值嘅重估啫。OK， 咁我哋都可以討論咗一下嘅。係朱生你要補充啊
？Just for members' information, the anti-avoidance that Karen is referring to in relation to a bank as example given by Mr. Tin is concerning, for example, a bank selling a property to subsidiaries and in such a way realize gain, and that can is actually addressed by Section 38, subsection 2 D in the Basel III rules. Yeah. It's just for members' information.
所以佢哋可以繼續啦。
好。
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, the final two, fourth and fifth points, are rather technical points relating to a formula for calculating something called a credit valuation adjustment capital charge. During the crisis, a lot of losses actually suffered by banks were not suffered from default of counterparties, but rather from the downgrading of counterparties. So the mark-to-market value of the contract with the counterparties fell because the counterparties were downgraded. So Basel III has introduced something called a credit valuation adjustment risk charge, so that banks will hold capital against that risk of mark-to-market losses. But in calculating this charge, you need to banks need to map an external rating for a counterparty, AAA, AA, whatever, to get a weight for that counterparty, and that weight then goes into the formula to calculate the CVA charge. And we have we've made two adjustments in this area. The first relates to something that's historical. At the request of some authorised institutions, we already recognise in the banking capital rules ratings from 3 Indian rating agencies for Indian corporates. And we're mapping mapping external ratings to get the weight to go into the CVA calculation. We need to accommodate those Indian ECAI, those Indian credit rating agency ratings. And we follow the Reserve Bank of India's mappings of those Indian ratings to obtain the credit quality grades necessary to assess the risk in the existing banking capital rules. And those are slightly different from the mapping of the international rating agencies like Moody's, Standard & Poor's, etc. So we have made an adjustment in the CVA calculation just basically to reflect that difference, that we're dealing with two sets of rating agencies, international rating agencies and Indian rating agencies. And the final point in point 5 is again along similar lines. For determining the weight applicable to a counterparty to calculate the CVA charge, where the counterparty doesn't have an external rating from any rating agency, then under Basel III there's a need to map a bank's internal rating to the external rating to get the weight. Now, for banks that adopt the internal ratings-based system for calculating their regulatory capital, they obviously have internal ratings-based system. So they can map their internal ratings to the external ratings through a mapping scheme that's approved by us. But for smaller banks that don't use the internal ratings-based system, they're not IRB banks, as we say. For simplicity, we've allowed them to assign a flat weight of 1%, which corresponds to a BBB rating. Now, we've done that because we think the 1% is a sort of reasonable cost-benefit analysis, being sort of a fair, conservative approximation of what would be the average weight of a pool of counterparties. So it's to stop small banks having to develop a sort of a rating system so that they can have an internal rating to map to an external rating to get the weight for this particular calculation. So we've gone for a flat 1%. We've consulted the industry about this, and the industry have indicated that is acceptable to them. So it's a bit technical.
OK。咁啊，主要嘅差異已經即係按照我哋上次嘅要求就已經陳列咗頭先講嘅五個主要點啦。咁啊，至於英文本嘅仲有冇需要嘅逐條文嘅審議咧？你哋冇需要噶啦。OK。
補充嚇，多謝主席。
咁啊，有關委員方面，對於如果剛才講嘅政府主要將嗰啲出咗差異嘅講咗之後咧，我諗我哋按照正常情況底下咧，就係英文嘅條文咧，頭先所講就係由政府方面同埋我哋嘅法律顧問都係進行過審議嘅。咁我哋呢度咧就唔逐條去做噶啦。 咁咧，如果喺呢個完成呢部分嘅審議之後咧，我哋就亦都會請助理法律顧問咧就條文嘅中文本方面嘅審議做一個簡報嘅。咁係咪請簡律師講講？
係主席，咁個中文嘅修訂規則咧，我哋睇咗噶啦。咁我哋就有啲某啲嘅草擬嘅問題同政府係作出要求澄清嘅。咁政府都答咗我哋噶啦。咁我哋冇其他嘅問題，再會跟進嘅。
好。之後咧，我哋就想睇睇呢個成個立法時間表嗰方面啦，就想同大家講講，就係審議期咧就延展嘅時間咧，已經喺上次大會咧都向主席提咗，就係最遲就係12月嘅12號，即係本年12月12號。修訂附屬法例作預告嘅期限呢，就係5日5整天嘅呢，就係12月5號叫做最後嘅預告，而向內會作出報告日期呢，就係11月嘅30號。呢3個日期呢，必須請大家都注意嘅。咁呢就有關如果提出修正案呢，就係請大家留意，就係12月5號必須之前提出。咁亦都預告咧，就30號咧由內會上邊咧就小組委員會會作出一個審議嘅報告。咁咧就呢度亦徵詢委員嘅意見，係是否同意本人以小組委員會主席嘅身份咧，會喺內務委員會向大會提交有關研究附屬法例及其文書嘅報告嘅議案嘅辯論之中咧進行發言，嚟報告呢個委員會嘅審議工作。係咪大家接受？如果同意呢，我就會按照呢個時間表呢，就做呢個有關安排。就請秘書處咧預留下一段嘅時間呢，就睇下有冇需要我哋仲
繼續開會，因為
係啦，
會有啲書面啦，我哋會問工會啦，咁係點樣處理呢？係開會啊，還是係用傳閱形式？
想徵詢下大家意見啦，因為正話有部分嘅文件我哋都仲會同工會溝通。咁需唔需要用會嘅方式，抑或係直接將文件送俾大家？冇意見嘅話呢，我就按剛才嘅時間表做嘢，就即係提供俾內會同埋大會啦。係
送俾我哋 OK 㗎。
會送俾大家得㗎啦。OK。咁如果咁嘅話呢，我諗我哋嘅總體審議咧就係到呢度為止㗎啦。咁呢就如果有特別嘅需要呢，我哋先至再會同大家即係溝通嘅。咁喺度我就多謝官員嘅出席，亦多謝我哋委員為呢個審議做咗咁多工作。多謝我哋秘書處。
多謝主席。
咁我哋會寫去銀行公會。